I think we all come to a point where we ask ourselves, what am I doing with my life? You look around and you go, man, I don't necessarily like my job, but I know I've got to go to my job. Maybe some of us are just running crazy with our kids. There's so many things to do. There's so many more things you want to do for your kids. And we go, what am I doing? I think January is a great month to ask that question. What am I doing? Because, Proverbs 29:18, it says, where there is no vision, the people dwell without restraint. That just means, man, you'll do anything that comes along if you don't have a definitive point you're aiming at. So King Solomon, he starts his book of Ecclesiastes asking this exact question. He says, Ecclesiastes 1:3, he says, so what does a man gain from all his efforts that he works at or toils at or labors at under the sun? And the interesting thing about Ecclesiastes, it's a book of questions. Proverbs is a book of practical wisdom, like just really practical. You do this, you're going to get this in your interactions with people. Ecclesiastes is a book of existential questions. Like, what am I doing on earth? What's the point of all these things we're doing? And that's why I love the book, and that's why I'm going to be going through it here. But he asks this question. He says, what are we gaining from this under the sun? And I think the book of Ecclesiastes is not about cynicism or pessimism. It's really about perspective, keeping your life in perspective. And you'll notice throughout the book, he says, under the sun. That's an important line, because that is really about what is the perspective you're looking at. If you're looking at it from the perspective of just here, what's going on right now in this earth, in this life, you're going to lose a lot of perspective and you're going to get lost in the weeds. But if you keep an eternal perspective and keep focused that there's something higher we're aiming at, that's how things find meaning. So he asked this question. And I think it's really important to ask that. What am I aiming at? What am I shooting for with all this stuff I'm doing? What I've found with a lot of people as a coach and a pastor is I think most people know more what they don't want than what they do want. So you ask them, what are you aiming for? And they say, well, I hear this from men a lot. I just don't want to be poor. You go, okay, well, how will you know when you're not poor? And the answer ends up being, well, I just need a little bit more. That's not a vision for the future. That's running from something, right? And you can run from something in any direction. You can only run towards something in one direction. Most of us are running from something. Some people say, I just don't want to be lonely. So what you do is you end up spending time with people you don't like, trying to impress people you don't like, just so you're not lonely. Some people end up dating people just to be constantly dating somebody so they're not lonely. They feel like they're a failure if they're alone. So first thing you got to define is, what's your why? Why am I doing what I'm doing? A few years ago, somebody told me I need to start a podcast. And I knew that to keep a sustainable podcast, I need a really good why. So for years, I didn't start one. But then one day I realized my dad isn't going to be around all the time for my daughter. And I want my daughter to learn from my dad's wisdom. So I realized I need to start a podcast where I talk to my dad about stuff I learned from him growing up. That became my why for my podcast. And 200 episodes later, it's not an effort to do it because I know the why of what I'm doing. What's the why for what you're doing with your kids, for your job? And here's what's really challenging about it is oftentimes what we're seeking, our desires change, right? Thomas Merton talks about many people climb a ladder of success and then get to the top and realize that their ladder was leaned against the wrong wall. That would be the worst kind of failure. But our desires change. What I wanted in my 20s was different than what I wanted in my 30s, what I wanted in my 40s. So you may look right now and you may be evaluating your life and going, wow, everything I'm shooting for is something I wanted in my 20s, but all of the important things in my life have changed. I had a lot of plans I had for myself before I hit 40, but I didn't calculate into the equation I'd be married, have a daughter. That's way more important than some of the plans I had. So I had to let go of some of those plans to get where I wanted to go. Otherwise, I would be toiling and striving for something that I really didn't want, but I thought I did. It's really tricky. Human desires change all the time, which is where Jesus comes in and he says, guys, eternal perspective. If you really want your life to have meaning and purpose, the best thing you can do is seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Matthew 6:33. He's basically saying, seek what God values. If you'll seek the highest good, he'll show you what you really want. In fact, it says in Psalm, if you delight yourself in the Lord, he'll give you the desires of your heart. And our desires change all the time. But God knows what's really going to be good for you, what you're really going to want. So as we start the new year, I want to ask you, look at what you're doing in your work, your family relationships. Ask yourself, what is it you're really aiming for? What's the why behind what you're doing? And if you don't really have a good reason, start seeking the Lord and saying, Lord, maybe my values have been off this year in the past. I want my values to line up with your values. And as you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, you're going to find there's a lot more meaning in life. And he's going to give you the things you desired, but you didn't even know that you desired. Pray you have a great start this year off strong, and follow me every day this month for a time in Ecclesiastes.